my application for a grant in order to see what could be done. It was the Institute of New Economic Thinking to see what could be done to change the way economics was taught. And as a result of that, we set up two parallel task forces, one in the UK and the other under Perry Mehrling Professor Mehrling in the States. And this is our joint report on what we've achieved. And we have made progress, and we have got, I think, the outlines of a proposal which we're putting to this session in order to elicit some good comments and criticisms, because it's a very, very difficult thing to start tinkering around with a discipline that has 250 years scientific development behind it, and yet which falls short in so many respects of what we need from economics, in our view. So I'm going to start with the first slide. I pressed something which should produce it. There we are. So that's just the economics of the real world. But the important one is the Queen's question. I want to spend just a second on that, because the first heading there is useful economics. And our aim has been to develop a more useful economics. The Queen's question, for people who are not aware of it, was asked at the LSE in November 2008 on a visit, and she said, why didn't you tell us, to group government, why didn't you tell us that it was going to happen? What was wrong with your predictive powers? And anyway, that became the Queen's question, and it gave rise to great discussion about what was right with economics, what was wrong with economics, why was it the wrong question, and so on. But anyway, the whole discussion arose out of that, the discussion to have a more useful economics. And this, we felt, when we started, our task force started talking about this, had to start at the level of undergraduate teaching. And the fundamental philosophy we adopted was one we called disciplined eclecticism, the last line. And the idea behind that was that economics is a discipline, and it should not renounce its rigor. But there was no single theory of economic behavior universally applicable. And so disciplined eclecticism seemed exactly right. And the point is, I think, that economics consists of a logical part and another part, which one might say is based on vigilant observation. And Keynes was not alone in finding first-rate economists rare, because although the logic came quite easily to them, the vigilant observation was less often done. And I do think, actually, that people who become economists do have a peculiar delight in the logical parts of the subject, and in solving logical puzzles and in creating logical structures. And that has sort of biased the discipline. Well, let's go on to on the side of demand. I don't think we need to say very much. It is that there is a demand for changes in economics by the consumers of the subject. And some of these figures are very striking. A demand for something new, something that isn't generally available, and that demand started to become urgent in the light of the economic collapse. I think I want to emphasize the second point here, because I think we developed very quickly, our joint groups, a common understanding of what the problems were, but on the other hand, we couldn't have exactly the same strategy for delivering the reforms, because the institutional structures in which economics are taught are very widely differ. Not only between the UK and the United States, but also between countries. So the deliverable side of these principles is embedded in different types of economics courses, and indeed in some non-economics courses, wider courses. And so that side of things had to be a national. Now, I turn to 6. Have I gone beyond 6? Yes. Well, 6 really just restates what 1 did, so I don't have to spend very much time with that. Again, emphasizing the limitation of the usefulness of the discipline at the moment, and I think the phrase stubborn unrealism was used quite often during our discussions. Yes. Students are taught theories as universally applicable truths when in fact they aren't. What has driven the development of the discipline, especially in recent times? Because this is the big barrier we saw ourselves faced with in an effort to reform the syllabus. And I think all of these points are important. The desire by professional economists to reproduce themselves, the determination of graduate courses to have people equipped to do graduate courses when they come up from their undergraduate training. So I think the demands of the graduate courses drive a great deal of what's taught at the undergraduate level. And you know, people did say, well, why aren't you tackling the graduate level of the subject? And we say, well, you've got to start from somewhere, and you can't do everything at the same time. And this is where perhaps one could more easily make innovations, though there is a lot of difficulty in doing that. Our solution, again, I think this echoes something Keynes said. I mean, I tend to cite Keynes a lot, not because of Keynesian theory, but because I think he was just so interesting about the state of economics. And he once said, I hope that economists may one day become as useful as dentists. And I think the other point here is seriously to try and mitigate the kind of ideological herd instinct of economists. What you find is that irrespective of their particular theory, what happens is that, like market analysts, they do tend to have quite strong ideological herd behavior, so that if you ask why is there this stampede to austerity at the moment, you might say yes, of course there's been massive pressure from markets, yes, there are big problems in financing government spending, but also there is insufficient eclecticism of theory to stop the stampede in one direction in response to these other pressures. I now turn to have a look at this, which is this number 10? Yes. This is a typical existing economics degree course in the United Kingdom, with its ascending levels of macro, micro, and mathematics as the core. You have no you have no compulsory history of economic thought anywhere. That's been eliminated. I think it exists as an option in 1 or 2 places, and only in 2 of the 12 best universities do you have compulsory economic history. So that bit of the subject has simply decayed and been eliminated as being of no relevance. And we think that's a great mistake. And when people, when we ask students, when surveys ask students, what do you want more from your economics course than you're now getting, they nearly always say economic history, more philosophy, some ethics, but economic history is very, very high up on their list of demands, and that is simply not being supplied. This is what our new curriculum is going to look like. and you can see its replacements. We call it the INET curriculum. It is, of course, that is in a way a misnomer because it hasn't been approved by INET. It's only been, the task force has been financed by INET, but what INET thinks about it will be a different matter. We hope that some of these teaching tools we're developing will be eventually licensed by INET in some way. And offered as teaching to universities to teach. A radical departure. I think that's more or less self-explanatory. I just want to emphasize the last sentence on the right at the bottom, majority that leaves academia and express economic ideas to lay audiences. You see, most of the people who read economics don't become professional economists, or read some economics, do some economics, and therefore they're not they're not people who we need to train to a level that is demanded by graduate courses, although that is the assumption, that you go through this and you emerge at the end of the day as a professional economist. Most of them won't. What we want them to do is to understand economic arguments, to be able to communicate economic reasoning, as was once said by one of our people. We want them to be able to read the op-ed columns of the Financial Times with understanding. Maybe a modest ambition for a 3-year course, but one that's often unfulfilled. We now turn to, yes, the core idea behind our ideal curriculum: width, competencies, and depth model. I've only got 4 more slides, and I've got 44 minutes remaining, I think, but that can't be right.
Some of that is mine.
Some of that is yours. Oh, really? Okay. Here we go. UK curriculum overview. Now, I want to just point out some innovations here, because although in some ways it is similar to what conventional curriculum looks like, it is in fact very different. The innovations here are, first of all, if you take year 1, all these 4 courses are economics in the real world, basic concepts, basic tools, continuing debates, are meant to run together with each other and inform each other. They should feed in. So the more theoretical bits should actually be embedded in the bits that deal with the economics of the real world and continuing debates in economics and economic theories. We had some suggestive list of topics here, which gives you some idea of what we want to talk about, introduce students to. Do we really need this much education? Why are some countries rich and others poor? Are the Chinese consuming too little, or the Americans consuming too much? I mean, these are relevant questions to which we want to introduce students very early on in the economics of the real world, just to show that economics can be helpful and what its help can be in answering those questions. And then the other thing in year 1, continuing debates in economics and economic history. Again, we want to emphasize that there are no finished theories, that theories change because circumstances change. And in that sense, the debates are interminable. And also in the first year, we want to introduce students in basic tools to the use and misuse of quantitative techniques, and give them some understanding of the philosophy of science and the extent to which economics fits the model of science, natural science, and the extent to which it doesn't. And then we continue width, well, this is just a more elaborate, more detailed prospectus of what I've just said. I emphasize mapping the economic landscape. This is to give students a sense of comparative magnitudes and institutions. So they don't use data in the abstract. They actually know what GDP means and how many billions of dollars we're dealing with when we're talking about national economies, something of that kind. Then under 2, year 2, this is more of a conventional intermediate macro econometrics. I just emphasize the language of economics and alternative approaches. I think there are 2 elements here. One is economists have got to be able to communicate, and not just to fellow economists. If they want to influence anything in the world, they've got to find a language in which they can talk to people who are not professional economists. And there are very, very few economists who are capable of communicating with wider audiences. You know, out of the thousands, maybe tens, 20s, hundreds of thousands of economists, you could almost name them on the fingers of a hand in the English language. And that is a terrific defect of their training. The ones who can communicate economic ideas are treasures in the profession. And somehow students have got to be able to do this and taught to do this, and not just think that once they can draw a diagram or write down an equation, they have mastered the art of economics, because economics is a persuasive discipline. And that's the second bit of it. It has its own language, its own particular forms of persuasion, which, again, need to be taught and mastered if people are going to be effective and useful. It's something Deirdre McCloskey's written about. She calls it the rhetoric of economics. Some people don't like that. We don't use that word. But anyway, it's a matter of how you persuade people of your arguments and the validity of your arguments. And that's something that isn't taught. And obviously, people should probably be given practice in writing essays, which they're not at the moment. And yes, again, here, what we're aiming to do is simply keep the real world constantly in front of the students as they end their course. And just one example of that. These are the kinds of things that we might make available in the options. I don't know, there are lots of them. They're purely illustrative. Justification for bankers' bonuses. Why did the Soviet Union collapse? The economic role of the state. Application of principal agent problem, and the Great Recession, and things of that kind. So this is roughly it. We present this to you for your consideration, for your criticism, and if you so feel like it, for your support for the project in general, and your suggestions of ways in which it could be improved. Thank you very much.